Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the cold, dimly lit bedchambers of medieval Europe, a time when bedrooms weren't just for sleeping. Imagine wooden floors creaking under filthy bare feet, heavy bed curtains holding in the scent of sweat and smoke, and firelight flickering over tapestries depicting saints, demons, and questionable moral choices. There's a dog snoring at the foot of the bed, a pot of urine tucked beneath it, and someone watching you from the corner, possibly the priest, possibly not. Either way, you're not sleeping alone. You're never sleeping alone. Because this isn't just about beds or sleep. It's about survival, power, punishment, and sometimes bizarre superstition. From bloodletting in your nightshirt to sleeping with relics in your sheets, tonight's journey will be far from restful. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting sweet dreams. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're new here, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a peasant's cottage in the middle of the 13th century. It's winter. Your breath fogs the air. There is no fireplace, just a hole in the roof to let out the smoke, but not all of it. The walls are wattle and daub patched with dung. The family pig is snuffling in the corner, and you're about to bed down for the night. No, not in a bed. On a sack of straw shared with your siblings, your parents, and possibly a stranger or two who's passing through. You all lie like logs, shoulder to shoulder, head to toe, or sometimes interlocked like pieces of a miserable, snoring jigsaw puzzle. And you don't undress. Clothes are expensive. Bathing is rare. And you're probably sewn into your undergarments for the season. That's right, stitched in. You'll be cut out of them in the spring, assuming lice or rot hasn't done the job for you. Your nights are broken. You don't sleep all the way through, nobody does. Medieval people typically had what we now call segmented sleep. You fall asleep early, wake in the middle of the night. Some say to pray, others to gossip. Rather have sex or just sit and think. Then you fall back asleep until dawn. It's this middle-of-the-night interlude where many of the strangest rituals unfold. Maybe you're sick. Maybe the village wise woman has been called. She enters the house with her pouch of herbs and something that smells like old leather and vinegar. She tells you to put on a blessed nightcap. Yes, literally a cap. Because it will keep evil spirits from entering your skull while you sleep. She rubs goose fat on your chest. She murmurs something that sounds like Latin, but probably isn't. And then she tucks a dried toad under your pillow, just in case. Or perhaps you're the lord of a manor slinking back to your solar after a banquet. Your bed is grand, yes, but you still share it. Servants might sleep at the foot. A page boy might be curled on a pallet beside you in case you need a message sent in the night. Your wife sleeps beside you, rigid and silent, because the priest said no coupling during Lent. And it's Lent for about half the year. But no matter. You mutter your prayers anyway, and reach beneath the pillow where a small wooden cross rests, one carved from a splinter of St. Edmund's coffin. You believe it will ward off nightmares and possibly impotence. And if you're a woman especially, one of high birth, your night is hardly restful. Maybe you're a young bride barely past your first bleeding, lying stiff under the weight of expectations. Your sheets are watched literally. In some noble households, witnesses are invited to the bedding. They watch the consummation. Blood-stained sheets are inspected the next morning, sometimes even paraded. Your body is proof of a transaction between families. Your bed is not yours. But even peasants aren't spared. A village girl might be expected to lie with a suitor in her parents' bed with her mother watching, to ensure he does his duty. Consent, it's a foreign concept. Virginity. A commodity. And everyone from the priest to the baker has opinions about what goes on between your legs. Let's say you've made it through your first sleep. The fire has gone out. You wake cold, itchy, and vaguely cursed. You light a rushlight, or maybe just stir the embers, casting red shadows that turn your curtain into a moving shroud. This is the moment where you might check the chamber pot. If you're sick, you peer into it for omens. Yes, urine reading is a legitimate nighttime ritual. Your wife or husband may even bring the pot to a local piss prophet in the morning. Or maybe you pray. Midnight is sacred. The devil's hour. You whisper Ave Marias into the dark. But it's not just God you're whispering to. You might make a little offering milk on the windowsill iron under the bed, just in case the fair folk come looking. You don't want to be taken in your sleep, because people were taken, or so it seemed. Sleep paralysis was a terrifying mystery. You wake frozen and swear something is sitting on your chest. A demon, a witch, a dead relative. The incubus was well known in medieval folklore. He visits women, violates them, leaves them weak. And the succubus does the same to men. So you sleep with iron scissors under your pillow, or a piece of bread stolen from the altar, or your hand on your crucifix. Then again, you might be dreaming of love. But love was dangerous too. Dreaming of a lover could mean possession. Women were warned not to fantasize at night lest the devil exploit their thoughts. Men were cautioned not to spill their seed in dreams. Some believed nocturnal emissions could be used in witchcraft. By the time second sleep comes, your body is tense. Your soul is weary, and you wonder if morning will ever come. But don't worry, you're not done yet. We haven't even opened the door to the monasteries. The monks are already awake. You stir from your second sleep just as the monastery bells toll for matins. The night is not over, it's only deepening. In the cloistered world of monks and nuns, nighttime is a sacred cycle of waking and praying. No tossing and turning, no muttered curses under woolen blankets. Instead, a strict timetable. Matins, lauds, and eventually prime. 7 canonical hours and several happen in the dead of night. You're cold before you rise. Your cell is stone, your blanket thin, and your cot little more than a plank. There's no mattress, just straw stuffed into a sack, and it smells of mildew. You fumble in the dark for your robe, careful not to wake the brother in the cell next to yours. Silence is absolute. Talking is forbidden, even if you stub your toe on the threshold. You wouldn't be the first to lose one to frostbite. And yet some monks fear silence even more than sin. Because when the church is still, other things speak. Whispers, scratching sounds. The devil moves quietly in monasteries. Nightmares are frequent sleepwalking, not uncommon. Some blamed impure thoughts. Others blamed spirits. You keep your rosary tight and your fist fingers locked around each bead like armor. By candlelight, you gather with your brothers in the chapel. Your breath rises like incense in the bitter air. The chant begins low, rhythmic, hypnotic. This is how monks and nuns fought off the temptations of the night. Prayer as defense. But even here, temptation seeped in. Many monks confessed to sensual dreams, and not always dreams. Masturbation was a sin, of course. But confessions tell a different story. Some monks punished themselves harshly after nightfall. Self-flagellation with knotted cords, sleeping on stone floors, binding their genitals with twine before bed. One brother reportedly fastened a chain around his thigh each night to quell desire. Another lay on thorns hidden beneath his sheet. And then there were the visions. Some monks reported visitations, beautiful women, spectral creatures, demons in the shape of lovers. Were they dreams or something else? You can't help but glance over your shoulder as you shuffle back to bed in the dark, trying not to look at the corners. But not everyone in the monastery was there willingly. Some young boys were given to abbeys at birth, becoming oblates, children raised entirely inside the cloister. They knew no world outside. Their nights were quiet, structured, and filled with prayer, but their dreams were their own. In the rare confessions that survive, we catch glimpses of terror, a fear of hell, of sin, of what might be lurking just outside the walls. And then there were the girls. In nunneries, the routines were similar prayers. At night, strict schedules, hard beds. But there's something more fragile in the way nuns describe sleep, a strange vulnerability. Some women claimed that saints visited them in dreams, rapturous, almost erotic experiences, visions of Christ embracing them, kissing their hands. One even described feeling a divine consummation in her sleep. The church called it mysticism. Others whispered about hysteria. A few nuns were quietly moved to smaller cells. Some were chained. A few disappeared. Meanwhile, in the secular world, night brought its own trials. If you were pregnant in medieval Europe, the bedroom became a battleground. Sleep was dangerous. Nightmares were omens. People believed that demons, especially the dreaded Lamia or Lilith, would steal unborn children in the night. So you tied amulets around your wrist, wove herbs into your pillow, placed holy water near the bed. You slept sitting up sometimes, tied to a post or propped with bolsters, afraid that lying flat would press the baby the wrong way. And you weren't alone. Birthing rooms were full of women, of mothers, of midwives, of saints, invoked through icons and, yes, of noise. Humming, chanting, whispering. Anything to keep the dark at bay. But of all the disturbing rituals, one of the most intimate was the trial by bed. Let's say you're accused of something: adultery, heresy, witchcraft. The law might demand an ordeal, and in some cases that ordeal took place in bed. One common method, the ordeal of sleep. You'd be tied down and kept awake for days, watched constantly. The idea was simple: a guilty conscience couldn't stay awake. If you drifted off and mumbled something incriminating in your sleep, it was considered proof. Some women were forced to lie still for hours bound, while priests murmured prayers over them to draw out the truth. A few confessed just to make it stop. Then there's the phenomenon of bed sharing, not for warmth, but for surveillance. Husbands and wives monitored each other. Servants reported what they heard. In one particularly eerie account from France, a noblewoman was accused of sorcery because her husband claimed she moaned strange words in her sleep. They summoned a priest. She was made to fast, then sleep, while witnesses sat beside her. When she whimpered something in Latin, a language she was never taught, they burned her bedding and sent her away. And what about the children? Medieval infants rarely had cribs. They slept with their mothers or siblings, often bundled so tightly they couldn't move. Swaddling was believed to straighten limbs and prevent sin. Yes, sin. A flailing baby was thought to be ruled by passions. To correct this, they were bound at night, silent and still like little penitents. But sometimes that stillness was permanent. Infant mortality was high, and nighttime deaths were common. To prevent overlaying accidentally smothering a baby in sleep, some mothers tied themselves to the far side of the bed. Others placed wooden bars between them and the infant. And if a baby died in the night, parents were expected to bury it quietly, lest neighbors talk. Some mothers whispered prayers over the tiny bodies, hoping to baptize them posthumously with tears. Others left tokens, ribbons, bits of bread on the grave at midnight. And then, of course, there were the night visitors. In towns, night was policed by curfews and the watch. But in rural areas, a woman sleeping alone was vulnerable, not just to spirits, but to men. Some village customs allowed bundling, a ritual in which a courting couple shared a bed fully clothed, sometimes even tied together, supposedly to prevent sex. You can imagine how well that worked. In certain regions, suitors would sneak into a girl's room at night and crawl under the covers. This was normalized, romanticized. But it wasn't always consensual. And if a pregnancy resulted, the woman was blamed. Some were married off. Others were beaten. A few were branded. Still, the bed remained the most powerful and perilous place in the medieval world. A sacred space, a site of judgment, and a gateway to both ecstasy and terror. And we're still just getting started. The fire is dying again. You're back in the peasant's cottage. Outside, a dog howls in the distance. Whether it's warning of wolves or witches, no one knows. Inside, the darkness presses in like a wet cloth. Your breath smells like onions and fatigue. You haven't bathed in weeks, and neither has anyone else in the room. But you're not alone in the dark, not really. Someone always watches. In the 14th century, even the act of sleeping could be surveilled, judged, interpreted. Tonight, a traveling friar has stopped by the village. He's sleeping near the hearth, and before bed he tells a story. He speaks of a woman who slept with her back to her husband, a subtle sin. To turn one's back was to deny warmth, companionship, and God. The friar says that in her sleep she muttered curses. The next morning she woke with a dead tongue. No priest could help her. Beware what you say in dreams, he warns. In medieval Europe, the line between the dream world and the waking world was porous. Dreams were not dismissed as random or private. They were treated as messages, revelations, accusations. What you muttered in sleep might be held against you. What you dreamed could be used as evidence. The church documented dreams meticulously, especially when they involved devils or saints. A nun dreaming of fire might be suspected of lust. A peasant dreaming of wolves might be accused of sorcery. You close your eyes anyway. But even in dreams, you're not free, because your bed might contain more than you. Lice, fleas, bedbugs, these were constant companions. In wealthier homes, straw mattresses were changed seasonally. In poorer ones, they festered for years. Children scratched in their sleep, sometimes to bleeding. It was common to wake with bites, scabs, or in bad cases, sores that never quite healed. Remedies included sprinkling ashes into the sheets, rubbing garlic on the skin, or sleeping with a cut onion under your pillow. And if the infestation was severe, you might sleep outside on the thatch or in the stable just to avoid being devoured by your own bedding. But bugs weren't the only things living in your mattress. Some people believed spirits could inhabit a bed, especially a deathbed. When someone died, the mattress was often burned. If it wasn't you, took a risk. The spirit might linger. In Germany, it was common practice to place a piece of steel beneath the pillow of a dying person to prevent evil spirits from claiming the soul mid-sleep. If the pillow was flipped after death, the soul could become trapped. In some places, windows were thrown open and doors unlatched to let the soul escape before sleep could trap it in the room forever. And if someone died in their sleep, peacefully, quietly, it was often viewed with suspicion. Was it really peaceful, or had something taken them, a demon, a witch, an angry ancestor? Death in sleep was feared as much as it was wished for. In households that could afford it, elaborate rituals took place around the dying bed. Candles blessed with holy water were lit. Family members whispered prayers. The bed itself might be sanctified. But in poorer homes, death came quietly, sometimes unannounced, and the person beside you might only realize they'd slept with a corpse when the morning chill wouldn't wake them. This gave rise to one of the most haunting nighttime rituals, the watching. When someone was ill or aged, a family member, often a child, would be appointed to watch over them during the night. Not to comfort them, to witness. If death came, someone had to see it. Someone had to speak the prayers. It was believed the soul could become lost if no one marked the moment. And sometimes it wasn't death that was feared, but resurrection. Stories spread of corpses rising from beds. The Nachzehrer, a German vampire-like figure, was said to chew on its burial shroud while lying in the grave, bringing plague and death to those it had loved in life. To prevent this, some families stuffed a brick into the mouth of the dead before burial. Others bound the jaw even after rigor mortis with coarse cloth, just in case. But let's pull back from the grave for a moment. Not all nighttime rituals were about death. Some were about desire. In medieval Italy, young women seeking love would sleep with a piece of bread baked with their own urine beneath the pillow. The belief that it would draw the man they loved into their dreams and their arms. In France, a woman might drink an herbal concoction before bed to summon a vision of her future husband. If the dream was clear, the marriage would be two. If the dream was muddy, the match was cursed. But sometimes dreams were more practical. In Slavic villages, women laid out small dolls, effigies of themselves beside their husbands. These dolls were made of straw and cloth and were believed to absorb the husband's aggression during the night. Better the doll be bruised than the wife. Then there were the saints. If you were childless, barren, or cursed with repeated miscarriages, you might visit a shrine and sleep beside a relic, perhaps a bone, a tooth, or a finger. These incubation rituals were centuries old. You'd lie down beside the relic, praying all night, hoping for a holy vision or a womb blessed in sleep. If you dreamed of the saint, especially if they touched you, it was believed your body would be healed. And yet not all saints were gentle. Some were stern, some terrifying. In one tale, a woman dreamt of Saint Catherine striking her with a burning staff. The next morning, she awoke with a red welt along her thigh and was pregnant within the month. The body was not separate from the soul, and sleep was not a passive state. Night was when the world peeled open, when things slipped through, when desire and punishment, healing and harm lay side by side under linen sheets. You roll over. The hearth has gone completely cold now. The straw beneath you pokes through the blanket. You shift slightly and feel a lump. It might be a rock, it might be something worse, but you don't move it. Superstition says, never disturb the bed in darkness. And besides, there's more to come. The next ritual, it's already begun. The candle sputters out with a wet hiss. Smoke curls upward in the dark, and for a few moments, you can't be sure if the smell is wax or something older, something more ancient than fire. You draw the covers to your chin, but they don't bring comfort. because tonight something's shifting. There's a presence in the room. Not a person, not a rat. Something unseen. Your grandmother once warned you not to sleep with your feet uncovered. That's how the dead find you. Toes first. Welcome to the age of night terrors, not the psychological kind, but the supernatural kind. In medieval folklore, sleep was one of the most vulnerable states a human could enter. The body was still, but the soul roamed. If you weren't protected, something might hitch a ride. In Scandinavia, the mare was feared a female spirit who crept into rooms at night and sat on the chest of sleeping men. She crushed their breath, paralyzed their limbs, and sometimes left behind bruises. The English word nightmare comes from this myth, but she wasn't unique. Every culture had its version. In Germany, it was the Alpi. In Slavic countries, it was the Zamora. In each tale, the creature visited in silence and brought a suffocating pressure. The protection rituals were many. You might turn your shoes upside down beside the bed, lay a broom across the doorway, sleep with a dagger under your pillow or an iron key on your chest. Mothers tied red thread around their children's wrists. Old women scratched crosses into bedposts with their nails. And always, always sleep facing east. But not everyone followed the rules. In England, tales spread of men who ignored the signs. One farmer refused to say his prayers before bed. He awoke frozen mouth open, unable to move. When his wife lit the candle, she swore she saw a shadow slip off the bed and into the wall. He died the next week. And then there were the changeling rituals. A baby sleeping too peacefully, or not enough, could be a sign it had been swapped by fairies. Parents developed strange, chilling tests. They might pretend to leave the room, then listen at the door. If the child began to speak in an adult voice or sing ancient songs, it was no child at all. In some cases, infants were laid on shovels and held over fires. The idea wasn't to harm, but to scare the changeling into fleeing so the real child could return. Even lullabies weren't safe. The lyrics sound gentle, but they hide warnings. Listen closely to a 14th century cradle song from northern England. Sleep, my little one, sleep, and be still, lest the black bird come down from the hill. That black bird wasn't just a bird. It was a spirit, a phantom, a warning. Mothers sang to keep the dark at bay, but they also sang to teach fear. And if your house was old, older than the village, older than the church, you might inherit its spirits. Some medieval homes were believed to hold memories. Not just ghosts, but habits. A room that remembered violence might pass it on. A bed where someone had died violently might cause bad dreams for years to come. So people performed purifying rituals. They sprinkled salt in the corners, lit herbs at nightfall, burned bundles of yarrow and mugwort beneath the mattress. And when salt wasn't enough, they called the cunning folk wise women or magical men. These weren't priests, though many claimed holy roots. They were herbalists, charm makers, and dream interpreters. For a price, they'd sleep in your bed, listen to the whispers of your walls, and leave behind a protective talisman. But protection came in strange forms. One popular charm was the bed bone, a small animal bone typically from a chicken or rabbit wrapped in cloth and tucked into the pillow. It was said to absorb sickness and spiritual attacks. If the sleeper began to feel ill, the bone would be removed and buried, never burned. Fire would release what it held. In other cases, people used witch bottles. These were hidden beneath floorboards or inside bed frames. Made of glass or stone, the bottles contained nails, urine, hair, and pins. The theory: They lured curses away from the sleeper and trapped them in the jar. Many of these bottles have been discovered centuries later, still sealed, still ominous. And then there was the ritual of bed rotation. If someone in the household was suffering from repeated nightmares or illnesses, the entire bed might be turned, literally moved to face a different direction, sometimes with the head where the feet once were. This realignment was meant to confuse the evil spirit who would come searching in the old position and miss its target. Families who couldn't afford a full repositioning might just flip the mattress. But what if none of this worked? Then came the confessional dreams. If your sleep continued to be plagued, you were brought before the priest not to confess what you had done, but what your dreams had shown. Were you being punished? Warned, tested in some monasteries, dream interpretation was an official role. A monk trained in visions would listen and tell you if your night wanderings meant sin, sanctity, or damnation. Sometimes you were told to fast, to sleep without food to clear the soul. Other times you were told to perform a vigil, no sleep, for 24 hours. Keep watch by the church door, hold a candle, recite the Psalms, let exhaustion cleanse you. Sleep was never just sleep. It was labor. It was danger. It was ritual. You shift in the straw again, pressing yourself deeper into the itchy fabric. You imagine the position of your feet, your head, your hands. Are you facing east? Did you say your prayers? Is that a lump under your sheet? Or something breathing, and still you are not allowed rest, because someone just knocked on your door. The knock comes again. Slow, hollow, not quite human. You freeze beneath your blanket, not because you expect a friend no one visits after curfew. In most medieval towns, the gates are locked at sundown, the night watch makes its rounds, and honest people are supposed to be asleep. So anyone knocking now, either terribly brave or something else entirely. In some parts of rural Europe, this knock was known. They called it a corpse knock, a hollow rap that came just before someone died. A warning. You weren't supposed to answer. In fact, you weren't even supposed to move. If you stirred, if you looked at the door, it might know you were there. So you keep still. The knock fades. But now you're wide awake, listening to the night the way medieval people did, with full attention. Because night was not silence. It was full of sounds coughing from the next room, dogs barking outside, the creak of roof beams, the crackle of dying fires, the hoot of an owl, or the long, bone-deep scream of a fox that just for a moment sounds very much like a woman. And if you're lucky, you go back to sleep. But not into peace, because now you've entered the part of the night where dreams become political. In medieval courts, dreams were treated like intelligence briefings. Kings and queens recorded them. Advisors analyzed them. If a monarch dreamt of snakes, a rebellion was brewing. If they dreamt of floods, war was near. Some kings even kept personal dream interpreters. One French lord in the 14th century famously postponed a battle because his dream showed a black bird pecking out his eyes. When he ignored the dream days later, he died from an arrow through the face. But it wasn't just royalty. Ordinary people recorded their dreams too when they could write. And when they couldn't, they told them to priests. Whole books were devoted to dream interpretation. Dreamt of milk fertility, of broken teeth, betrayal, of fire, sometimes purification, sometimes lust, sometimes divine anger. It depended on who you asked and what you were willing to confess. And that's the trick. Dreams were moral tests. You didn't just ask what you dreamt, you asked why. What did it reveal about your soul, your sins, your secrets. So even the simple act of sleeping became a stage. You were always being watched by your neighbors, by your confessor, by your God. But what if you didn't want to dream? Some people sought dreamlessness, blessed sleep free from visions. Monks drank teas made of lettuce and wild poppy. Poorer folk stuffed lavender and chamomile into their pillows. A few tried more dangerous methods, drinking lead-infused wine or inhaling smoke from datura leaves. These were poisons, but small enough doses could knock you out. The risk was death. But for those plagued by nightly visions of demons or tormenting memories, it was a risk worth taking. There were even incantations for dreamlessness. One old English charm instructed the sleeper to recite, "I bind my breath, I bind my sight, I lock my soul this holy night." Then they'd trace a cross on their chest, lie on their back, and not move again until dawn. But of course, most people didn't sleep alone. Even in castles, privacy was a luxury. Servants slept in side chambers. Pages slept on pallets. Guards rotated shifts through bed chambers. Curtains around the bed weren't just for warmth, they were for illusion. Behind them, secrets lived. Take the ritual of the warming maid. In noble households, it wasn't uncommon for a young servant girl to be sent ahead to warm the master's bed. She'd lie beneath the covers until the lord arrived, then be dismissed, supposedly. But in some cases, she stayed. This was both custom and unspoken expectation. Many girls became pregnant this way. Some were quietly married off. Others sent to nunneries. A few vanished entirely. And if a child resulted, things became even murkier. In some courts, a nobleman's bastard was still raised in the household. But among peasants, it meant scandal. Families might stage public cleansing rituals, bathing the girl in the river at dawn, making her walk barefoot to church, or worse, laying her on a cold stone overnight to cool the lust from her body. It didn't stop men from returning to her bed. But let's say the bedroom wasn't a place of sin, but of healing. Because healing, too, had its bedtime rituals. One of the strangest involved the bedside leeching. For certain ailments, fever, imbalance of humors, headaches, it was believed the best time to apply leeches was just before sleep. You'd lie back on a stiff board, the leechman would attach the creatures to your neck or temples, and then you were told to lie still. No touching, no crying out. The blood must flow quietly. Then there was bedside bleeding, more dramatic. A vein opened, blood draining into a bowl while you reclined. Afterward, you'd be bundled in thick blankets, given hot ale, and left to sweat out the sickness. Often, a coin or blessed medallion was placed on your chest to guide your soul back in case the bloodletting took too much. And let's not forget the sin stone. In some parts of Wales and Ireland, people believed illness came from hidden sins. To purge them, a heavy stone was placed on the chest of the sick person overnight. They had to lie still until morning. If the stone felt lighter at dawn, the sin was forgiven. If it grew heavier, they were beyond saving. That's how serious sleep was. Not just a break in the day, but a negotiation with forces unseen. You're beginning to feel it now, aren't you? That heaviness in your chest. Maybe it's the weight of the stories. Maybe it's the stone. Or maybe it's just that dawn is still a long way off. The wind picks up outside. A low whistle through the cracks in the walls. The kind of sound that makes you wonder whether it's just air or something breathing. You pull the covers tighter, try not to move too much, just enough to ease the ache in your hips from lying on straw that's more twig than cushion. The scratch of it against your skin is familiar now, like an old irritant you've learned to live with. But you're not here to rest. You're here to understand, what it meant to endure sleep in the Middle Ages. Let's return to the manor house. You're a guest tonight, a visiting merchant maybe, or a minor noble. There is no spare room, no private quarters. You've been offered a space in the master's hall where others are already sleeping. No one's speaking, but you can hear the shuffle of feet under blankets, the snort of someone's breath, the soft moan of a dreamer. Bedfellows were common, not just among families, but among strangers. People who'd never met before might spend the night side by side, warming each other through a shared body heat pact. Not quite friendship, not quite trust. Just a mutual understanding that freezing was worse than awkwardness. And sometimes, not everyone in that bed stayed alive. If someone died in the night, the other sleepers didn't always notice. A man might wake to find the person beside him cold, stiff, unbreathing. The custom was to immediately turn the body to face the wall, never let the dead look out toward the room. Then the bed was abandoned, salt-sprinkled prayers whispered. No one would sleep in that spot again for weeks, but in more remote regions, death didn't mean removal. If the ground was too frozen to dig a grave, the body stayed in the bed. Wrapped in linen feet, bound mouth, stuffed with cloth to prevent the soul shun from escaping in moans. It might take days before burial. The family just kept sleeping. Life and death were constant bedfellows. And then there were the bedside blessings. In noble houses, before lights were extinguished, someone might walk from room to room with holy water flicking it toward each bed. In some homes, the ritual was led by the head of household. In others, a priest was hired to bless the sleep. He'd sprinkle each sleeper with a few drops, say a short prayer, and mark the door with chalk. For those who couldn't afford such blessings, they made do with charms. A favorite among mothers, the three-bread cross, 3 pieces of bread baked with holy water tied together and placed beneath the baby's pillow. Supposed to ward off fevers, seizures, and night demons. But what about the unlucky ones, the cursed sleepers? Some people were believed to be born bad sleepers. They woke screaming. They thrashed. They saw things others didn't. These weren't just bad dreams, they were seen as spiritual disorders. The afflicted might be brought to a healer who specialized in nocturnal curses. The treatment, strange and specific. One charm required the sleeper to lie flat, while 9 women, yes, specifically 9, walked around the bed counterclockwise, chanting a psalm backwards. Another ritual involved placing a cold iron knife under the bed and a mirror at the foot. The idea was that anything dark trying to approach would be reflected or repelled. And then there were the sleepwalkers. Today we see somnambulism as a sleep disorder, but in the Middle Ages it was far more ominous. A sleepwalker was thought to be traveling between worlds, not entirely present in body or spirit, sometimes possessed, sometimes blessed. Always dangerous. Stories abound of a child who walked barefoot across hot coals and didn't burn, of a woman who climbed the church steeple in her sleep and sang in Latin, of a man who wandered into a field and returned at dawn with flowers in his mouth, flowers that didn't grow anywhere nearby. Families took precautions. They locked bedroom doors, tied sleepers to posts with woolen cords, hung iron bells from the ceiling to jingle if someone moved in the night. Some even placed bowls of ash near the bed to track nighttime footprints. If the prints didn't match the sleeper's feet or weren't human at all, there were consequences. Punishments varied. In some villages, a suspected cursed sleeper might be forced to confess sins publicly. In harsher places, they were whipped lightly before bed, a discipline meant to keep the devil from riding their dreams. That phrase, ridden by the devil, was a common diagnosis for night paralysis hallucinations, even erotic dreams, particularly for women. If a woman woke in a sweat, breathless, with no memory of what she'd dreamt, but a deep sense of shame, the assumption was clear something visited her. A succubus, a sin, a demon in disguise. In some cases, the woman was made to sleep with a relic bound to her thigh. In others, her bed was moved into the church for a night of purification. But sometimes the terror didn't come from within. Sometimes it came through the door. You're a young bride now, married off at 14. Your new husband is twice your age and rarely speaks to you in daylight. But at night, his rituals begin. Before entering the bed, he lights a candle and says a single phrase over and over. The body is not mine, it is owed. Then he gets in beside you and takes what's owed. This is not affection, it's not love, it's tradition. In some parts of Europe, women had no right to refuse their husbands' advances. Marriage was a transaction, and the bedroom was where the price was collected. The church said marital intimacy was sacred, but in reality, it was a duty. Even when a woman was ill, even when pregnant, even when crying, there were expectations. And so she developed her own rituals. Some women whispered protection spells. Others placed bitter herbs near the bed, wormwood tansy rue, to dampen desire or cause impotence. A few even wore protective amulets hidden in their hair. Anything to survive the night. The next morning she'd rise early, wash in cold water, and pray. Not for salvation, for endurance. And yet for some women the bed became a place of quiet power. Widows especially. A widow in control of her household often performed her own night rituals. She might sleep with keys under her pillow, a sign she ruled the home. She might write her dreams in a private book locked away in a chest. And if she chose to take a lover, she did so in secret with rituals of her own. A red ribbon tied around the bedpost. A silver ring placed upside down beside the lamp. There were rules for every kind of sleeper. Even you. And now you turn again, just slightly. The mattress sighs beneath you, or maybe it's something else. The candle's long gone. But the ritual isn't over. In fact, it's only just begun. The darkness feels thicker now. It's not just the absence of light, it's the presence of something else. You can't name it, but it hovers. Just beyond the curtain, just outside the door. In the medieval world, sleep didn't mark a boundary between safety and danger. It invited danger in. And the longer you stayed still, the more the invisible crept closer. But you're not alone. Someone across the hall is stirring. A child, maybe, or an elder with a bladder that knows no mercy. You hear the muffled scrape of the chamber pot, the hush of someone trying not to wake the others. Because noise at night meant suspicion. In noble homes, noise after curfew could bring the guard. In peasant cottages, it brought curses. You don't talk after sundown unless you're praying. You don't laugh that invites demons. You don't sing unless it's a lullaby or a psalm. Anything else could be misinterpreted. And those who were misinterpreted, they might end up in the hands of the night priest. Yes, some towns and parishes appointed clergy specifically for after-dark duties. He wasn't there to hear sins whispered in the light. He was the one you called when a girl had nightmares every night for a month. When a boy sleepwalked onto a frozen river and said he saw angels. When someone in the house screamed and couldn't say why. He came with oil relics and a candle that had been blessed 3 times, and he never sat down. His role was to observe, to listen, to pray. And when he left, he always walked backward through the door. Never turn your back on a room where darkness once spoke. But let's return to the body for a moment. Your body. Because in the Middle Ages, nighttime wasn't just when the soul was exposed. It was when the body could betray you. A cough in the night might be more than illness, it could be a sign. Blood on the sheets didn't just mean tuberculosis. It might mean a curse, a visitation, a punishment. So people watched their bodies carefully. Men worried about nocturnal emissions. Yes, that's right. Ejaculation during sleep wasn't just awkward, it was alarming. Some believed it drained the life force. Others feared that succubi collected it for dark rituals. Monks who suffered from these nocturnal sins might sleep on cold stone or wrap themselves tightly in scratchy cloth to prevent temptation. A few even strapped iron bands across their hips, and women had their own burdens. Menstruation, when it came during sleep, was seen as impure but also powerful. Blood found on sheets in the morning was sometimes preserved, used in love potions, fertility spells, or more darkly, accusations of witchcraft. If a woman bled too much or at the wrong time, neighbors might whisper. So many women kept herbs beneath their pillows. Pennyroyal, sage, yarrow, not just for cramps or headaches, but for secrecy. The herbs masked the scent of blood, kept the sheets cleaner, and maybe, just maybe, warded off suspicion. But suspicion didn't need a reason. Take the case of the wet pillow. In some households, if a sleeper's pillow was found damp in the morning, it was seen as a sign of possession. Tears, no. That was too human. Spirits caused it. A moist pillow meant that something had leaned close in the night, breathed into your mouth, wept for what it had lost or what it was about to take. To fix it, families dried the pillow in sunlight and then buried it for 3 days beneath the threshold of the church. Yes, buried. They believed the holy ground would draw out whatever spirit had visited. Afterward, the pillow was never used again. Burned or thrown into running water. Of course, not all nighttime rituals were born of fear. Some were sacred. In Italy, there was a custom of angelic sleep. Before bed, a child would be told a story, not of saints or demons, but of angels. The parent would kiss each finger and say the name of a heavenly being. Then they'd press the child's palms together and whisper a prayer into their hair. It was meant to invite divine company into their dreams. But even this had a twist. If the child spoke in tongues during sleep or awoke with glowing cheeks, it was said that an angel had truly come. A blessing, yes, but also a burden. That child might now see visions, might dream too clearly, might never sleep without company again. There are also records of bride blessings. A young woman on the eve of her wedding would lie in her bed while older women circled her room with candles. They would chant in low voices, tying ribbons to the bedposts, each representing a virtue, chastity, obedience, fecundity. The bride wasn't allowed to move. She was supposed to lie still, eyes open, silent, until the final flame went out. Sometimes that took hours, and not every woman made it. The pressure, the heat, the tension, some fainted. Others cried, and more than a few confessed to seeing a dark shape standing in the corner during the rite, watching, waiting. But let's not leave the men out. There was the ritual of the night oath. Young knight squires or even tradesmen would swear loyalty to a cause or lord not during the day but just before sleep. They'd lie in their bed alone with a dagger pointed toward their chest. They'd whisper their oath to the blade, promising loyalty in dream as well as deed. Why the dagger? Because if the oath was broken, it would be the first to know. A few even slept with it in hand. The ritual wasn't widespread, but where it was practiced, it was deadly serious. Some men refused to sleep without the dagger near, and if the dagger disappeared, that meant the oath had been accepted or stolen. Now you stir again. The mattress creaks, but not from you. There's something under it, something cold. You try not to think about it, but your toes curl away from the edge just in case. Above you, the rafters groan. The wind whistles again. You remind yourself it's just wind. And yet, something shifts. You've made it through another hour of night, but you're far from safe. The rituals continue. You're sweating now, not because it's hot, far from it. The air is cool, heavy with the smell of soot and something vaguely metallic. You can't place it, but it clings to your nostrils like a warning. Your body wrapped in coarse wool is damp from within. The mattress is lumpy and damp beneath you, the straw patchy from years of compression. You shift, hoping for relief. None comes. Outside, the town is quiet, but even that silence feels staged, like the town is holding its breath. This is the hour of the night watchers. Every village had the men with staves or bells patrolling in pairs or alone. They walked the perimeters, checked doors, sniffed for fire. But they weren't just guarding against theft or flames. They were listening, watching for signs that someone in town might be doing what shouldn't be done, because the midnight hour was sacred and vulnerable. Witches were said to move most freely between midnight and 3. Not necessarily to cast spells, though some did, but to visit. They didn't need to enter through the door. A crack in the wall, an open window, even the knothole in a floorboard could be enough. If a person slept alone and woke with scratches, bruises, or sudden dread, it might mean they were ridden, carried away in dream, used in rituals returned before dawn. Men reported waking in haylofts they didn't fall asleep in. Women found mud on their feet despite locked doors. One man in Hungary swore he awoke with feathers in his mouth and no memory of how they got there. The solution, bed chalking. A protective circle drawn in chalk or ash around the bed, sometimes including sacred symbols or words. The sleeper was forbidden to break the line. If they did, the protection failed. More elaborate versions required sprinkling holy water on each corner of the bed frame while reciting a psalm backwards. In one region of northern Italy, sleepers hung onions tied with red thread over their heads, onions to absorb evil red thread to trap it. And if those failed, you'd see the signs. Eyes ringed with purple, teeth grinding until they cracked, a scream in the middle of the night and silence afterward. But there were more acceptable nocturnal rituals too, ones the church blessed. In certain abbeys, monks practiced vigil dreaming. They'd fast for a day, then sleep kneeling, hoping for visions. Some believed that dream revelation was holier than waking insight. These monks recorded their visions of angels, of saints, of cryptic symbols that only years later were thought to foretell plague or war. Some of these visions became scripture. Others were banned. One monk dreamt of a great red beast rising from a river, carrying a baby in its jaws. He wrote it down, sealed it, and it wasn't found until decades later. No one knew what it meant. But the town where he lived flooded 2 years later, killing half its children. Coincidence, maybe. Maybe not. But even outside the monasteries, dreams were currency. In some courts, dreams were traded. That's right, traded. If you had a dream about someone, you could tell them, and depending on what it was, they might owe you something. A good dream could be rewarded with coin, bread, or favor. A bad one, you might be paid to keep it quiet. Some nobles kept dreamers close, offering a bed in exchange for early warning signs from the subconscious. One lady-in-waiting was kept in the queen's chamber specifically because her dreams were believed to be prophetic. She once dreamt of the queen's miscarriage before it happened. But dreams could also be used against you. Accuse someone of dreaming of the devil, and you could put them on trial. Inquisitors sometimes interrogated people about their sleeping thoughts. Did they ever dream of flying, of drowning, of wolves? Each symbol had meaning. Flight meant pride. Drowning meant secrets. Wolves meant hidden desires. And desire, especially of the erotic kind, was often punished even in dreams. If a woman confessed to having inappropriate dreams, she might be sent to the confessor 3 times a week, given bitter herbs, forced to wear a sackcloth nightdress soaked in vinegar. One nun wrote in her journal that she was made to sleep standing up in a box for a month. So that the devil may not find her resting flesh, the abbess reportedly said. But not all nighttime rituals were so harsh. Some were tender, even hopeful. In Wales, couples newly engaged were encouraged to share a bed, not for sex, but for breathing. They were to lie still, eyes closed, and match their breath until they fell asleep. It was believed that synchronized breathing helped align their spirits, that if one died early, the other would feel it in their dreams. And in parts of Bohemia, lovers left small objects under each other's pillows. A ring, a carved button, a flower pressed flat. If the object was warm in the morning, the love was true. If it was cold, the love had cooled. Superstition. Sure, but also something more. An understanding that beds were thresholds between life and death, between waking and sleep, between truth and illusion. So much so, in fact, that some people took it a step further. They practiced trial sleep, literally testing their fates through the night. A person facing a great decision, marriage, war, betrayal, might perform a sleep test. They would lie in bed between 2 candles, each marked with a symbol. One for yes, one for no. The candle that burned longer through the night held the answer. But they had to remain awake until one extinguished, lest the spell break. Another version used animals. A person would sleep with a black hen in the room. If it clucked once during the night, the answer was yes. If it remained silent, no. And if it died by morning, the answer wasn't meant to be known. Yes. Really. And if you think that's strange, just wait. Because some people didn't just wait for dreams, they summoned them. That's right, dream summoning. There were entire books written on it. Manuscripts with exact recipes, what to eat, what herbs to inhale, what direction to lie in. Want to dream of a lost loved one? Burn rosemary and thyme. Want to meet your future spouse? Sleep with mugwort under your pillow and your boots pointed toward the door. Want to speak to God that required sacrifice, fasting, celibacy, a room without light, and absolute silence for 7 days. On the 8th, you lay down blindfolded and waited. Not many people completed the ritual, but those who did, they claimed their dreams never left them. And now neither do yours. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, because the night is still speaking, and it hasn't told you everything yet. Something shifts in the ceiling. Not a beam, not the wind, a different kind of sound. The weightless creak of something stepping lightly above your head. No one should be up there, not at this hour, not in this house. But you don't rise. You don't speak. Because in the medieval night movement invites attention. And you've heard enough stories by now to know attention after midnight is rarely holy. The sound fades. You lie still. Your hands are clammy, your legs stiff. The damp of the bed has sunk into your bones, and the coarse blanket feels like sandpaper against your skin. Still, it's better to stay wrapped than exposed. You remember what your mother told you: never sleep with your back to the door. Never point your feet at it. And never, never leave your mouth open. Because in some parts of medieval Europe it was believed that the soul could slip out of the mouth in sleep. If the door was open, it might wander. If someone spoke your name aloud while you slept, your soul might not find its way back. That's why the most superstitious homes whispered only in the morning. Night belonged to shadows and spirits, and sometimes to sickness. Let's talk about the plague beds. When the Black Death swept through Europe, sleep became a battlefield. Families would try anything to prevent infection, and many of those attempts began strangely in the bedroom. The most common tactic, sleeping with vinegar cloths. These were linens soaked in herbal-infused vinegar, then laid over the mouth and nose or draped across the bed's headboard. Some people even stitched pockets into their pillows to hold garlic root and sage. Others slept upright, believing that lying flat allowed the plague to settle in the lungs. But once sickness entered a house, everything changed. Entire rooms were boarded up, beds stripped, straw burned. People were told to sleep alone if possible, or at the very least, to mark which side of the bed belonged to the sick and which to the healthy. In some households, a thin chalk line was drawn down the mattress. Crossing that line, whether in sleep or waking, was said to bring death within days. And if someone died during the night, you didn't wait for dawn. Their body was removed before the sun rose, usually wrapped in whatever blankets they'd died in. The mattress was dragged outside and burned, but not the bed frame, not always. In poorer homes, wood was too valuable, so the same frame might be reused again and again, holding death each time. To purify it, families would hammer iron nails into the corners and scratch a cross beneath the headboard. Some even placed a piece of bread under the legs of the bed bread that had been blessed, left to dry, and never meant to be eaten. Bread for the dead. Meanwhile, if a family couldn't afford new straw, they might sleep on stone for 7 nights. It was a form of penance and protection. The idea was that plague preferred warmth and softness. Cold and hard meant less to cling to. Of course, it didn't always work, but it gave people something to believe and something to do. In certain towns, local healers prescribed dream fasting. The sick were told not to eat before sleep, not to drink water, not even to speak. If they went to bed clean, empty of thought, hunger, and sin, they might receive a healing dream, a vision of the right herb, the right saint, the right next step. Sometimes it worked. Most of the time it didn't, but when it did, they remembered. One woman in Provence claimed Saint Sebastian appeared to her in a dream, placing a sprig of juniper on her chest. When she woke, her fever had broken. The dream was written down by a local monk, then copied, translated, and passed between households like a secret recipe. It became ritual before sleep, a sprig of juniper under the tongue. If you couldn't find juniper thyme, if you couldn't find either, you whispered the saint's name 3 times before closing your eyes, and you did not open them again until dawn. But not all sleep during plague times was fearful. Some sought it, longed for it. The exhausted, the grieving, the guilty. There are accounts of people climbing into the beds of the dying on purpose, not out of love, but hope. Hope that death would come for them too. In one village, a mother slept beside all 5 of her children as they died one by one. No one stopped her. They believed that grief was a sickness too, and that perhaps the bed could carry her sorrow into the next world faster. There were even deathbeds kept warm just in case someone didn't make it through the night. These were not figurative. In some parishes, extra beds were left ready in side rooms, pre-made with fresh straw, a cross beneath the pillow, and a candle beside the frame. The moment a person's breath became ragged, they were moved there, so they could die in the prepared place. It was believed to keep their soul from wandering, and when they passed, someone had to sleep in the room that night. Not in the bed, never in the bed, but nearby, to witness, to make sure the spirit didn't rise confused or angry, to be the first to speak the name of the dead aloud. I see you. I carry you. Words of release. Words of goodbye. You shift now subtly and realize your body has molded into the shape of the bed. Every ache has its echo in the mattress. Every sound in the room has an ancient precedent. You are no longer just a visitor in this history. You're part of the ritual. Every breath you take now mimics 1,000 others taken centuries before, and the night still isn't over. There's more. You've stopped trying to sleep. There's no use pretending anymore. Your eyes are open in the dark, staring at the wooden ceiling that groans with age. Every knot in the wood looks like an eye. Every shadow resembles something curled and watching. The air smells of damp wool, old breath, and burnt tallow. A mouse scurries somewhere behind the wall, but even that sounds distant now. Your body is still, but your thoughts are marching in circles. That's fitting, because in the Middle Ages, nighttime wasn't just for resting, it was for reckoning. This was the hour of penitential sleep, especially among the devout or the guilty. There were entire rituals for preparing your body to suffer while unconscious. Flagellation before bed, sleeping on bare boards, wearing a belt of thorns beneath your nightclothes. Even nobles participated, particularly after war infidelity or public scandal. To sleep in comfort after sin was considered arrogant, so instead, they punished their bodies through the night. One woman, Countess Adelheid of Würzburg, is recorded as having slept for 5 years on a bare floor, with only a thin sheet after the death of her husband, believing her grief should not be softened. But not all penance was physical. Some of it involved the confession bed. In certain Benedictine abbeys, monks who had troubling dreams, especially erotic ones, were expected to report to a senior brother at dawn. But if the dream was too vivid, too shameful, they might request to confess in their bed without rising. The confessor would sit on a stool beside the mattress, listen, and pray silently. No eye contact. No judgment. That was the idea anyway. But some records hint more at rituals that crossed lines. A monk whose dreams were too frequent might be watched at night. Not metaphorically, literally. Another brother appointed by the abbot would sit in the corner of his cell and record what he heard. Any whisper, any moan, any cry. all written down, sealed, and sometimes forwarded to Rome. Imagine sleeping under that kind of scrutiny. But the lay people had their own strange rites. Have you heard of the night mirror test? It was used mostly by young women, curious, anxious, eager to know their future. The ritual was simple. Just before bed, you'd stare into a polished metal mirror by candlelight, then blow out the candle. The face you saw last, yours, warped by firelight, was supposed to linger in your dreams. But if you saw another face, one not your own, that was your future husband, or your future child, or your death, depending on what the face looked like. In some cases, girls slept with the mirror under their pillow to hold the image. But mirrors were rare and expensive. More often, they used bowls of water, believing the reflection and ripples would carry them a message. One wrong glance, however, and the dream could curdle. If you saw a shadow, you were advised not to sleep at all that night. It meant the dream spirits were already in the room, so they'd keep vigil. With salt at the corners of the room, a broom laid across the threshold, and one hand on a prayer charm until morning. But sometimes none of it helped, because the room itself was cursed. Not by magic exactly, but by memory. There are stories of unquiet rooms, chambers, that held echoes of violence, betrayal, or grief. A murder committed in a bed, a suicide on the floor, a child who died during childbirth, or an unspoken illness that consumed a family over months. These rooms were rarely sealed. Life went on. But people knew. The air felt heavy. The curtains never swayed. The candlelight flickered strangely, and sleep came with resistance. If a guest stayed in such a room unknowingly, they might toss and turn all night, wake soaked in sweat, whisper names they'd never heard before. One account from a priory in York tells of a visiting scribe who wept in his sleep for 3 straight nights, despite having no memory of why. When questioned, he said he kept seeing a child's hand reaching toward him in a dream. The priory sealed the room after that, for 30 years. But not all beds were dangerous. Some were sacred. Let's turn to the birthing bed. Not just a place of labor, but of ritual. Before a medieval woman gave birth, the bed itself was prepared with care. Sheets sprinkled with herbs, lavender, sage, marjoram. A crucifix stitched into the headrest. In wealthier homes, relics were even sewn into the mattress, pieces of bone teeth, or cloth taken from saints. Women in labor were not left alone. They were surrounded by other women, midwives, mothers, aunts, neighbors, and the door was barred not to keep people out, but to keep spirits from entering. No man was allowed near once labor began, not even the priest. He waited outside unless things went very wrong. If a woman died in childbirth, the bed was considered tainted. It was taken apart, burned, or if still needed, rebuilt with new straw and salt pressed into the corners. The frame was washed with vinegar, blessed, and turned so it faced a different direction. Some midwives claimed the soul of the woman lingered, and it was dangerous to reuse the bed without proper rites. And what about the child? A newborn didn't sleep alone. For the first year of life, it was common for the infant to sleep in bed with the mother. Not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. Heat, feeding, protection. But this brought danger too. Overlaying was the term for accidental suffocation in sleep. A child crushed by the mother's body during the night. It happened often. To prevent it, women tied themselves to one side of the bed with rope. Others placed wooden bars between themselves and the child. Some slept sitting up with the infant bound to their chest. And still the worst happened, which led to the midnight naming ritual. If a child died before baptism, their soul was believed to wander. So parents desperate and grieving would sometimes whisper a name into the child's ear after death, just in case. The name would be spoken 3 times, then a candle lit, then silence. It was not sanctioned by the church, but it was done anyway. Because sleep wasn't the only thing at risk in the night. Souls were too. Now you lie there, eyes heavy, mind whirring. Every creak, every draft, every breath of wind feels charged. You're no longer surprised by the presence in the corner. You've stopped counting hours. There is only night and the rituals that carry you through it. And more are waiting still. You hear it again. That soft, rhythmic tapping, not at the door this time, but from beneath the bed. Like fingernails on wood. Slow, measured, intentional. You tell yourself it's the old beams settling the wood, shifting in its sleep. But deep down you know better. Because in the medieval night, the world below the bed was not empty. It was occupied. And many feared it more than what lay above. Welcome to the realm of beneath-the-bed rituals. It wasn't just a child's fear, it was adult doctrine. Some households placed iron knives under the mattress points outward. Others laid sprigs of thorn bush beneath each leg of the frame. In parts of the Baltics, people stuffed dried nettles and ashes underneath whispering prayers as they did. All to keep what should not rise from doing so. You might find bones down there, but not from rats. Some households placed the bones of dead relatives beneath the bed to guide dreams. In Slavic traditions, this was called shadow sleeping. The idea that sleeping above a loved one's remains brought visions of the future. But if done improperly, it could invite something darker, restless spirits, misremembered ancestors, or something pretending to be them. So the bones were wrapped in wool, given honey, and most importantly, never named aloud, because names were power. Speaking a name at night, especially in a whisper, could call that person to you. If they were alive, they might dream of you. If they were dead, they might visit. So most people avoided names after sundown. Parents called their children little one. Lovers said my heart. Servants used titles, nicknames, anything but the true name. And if someone heard their name in the dark, spoken by no one, they were advised not to respond, no matter how familiar it sounded, because answering sealed the invitation. But let's move higher now toward the ceiling, because above the bed were just as many rituals. The bed canopy, for instance, wasn't just decorative or warm. It was a shield, a veil, a private dome. In some traditions, it was laced with herbs and blessed threads. In others, it was stitched with symbols, protective circles, ancient sigils hidden beneath folds of fabric. Few people ever noticed them. Fewer understood them. One old tale tells of a noblewoman who stitched an entire psalm into her bed canopy backwards. It was meant to confuse demons. So if one entered her room, it would be trapped, trying to read its way out until morning. She died peacefully at 94, with a smile on her lips. Then there were overbed offerings. In certain households, particularly in the Alps, families hung baskets above beds. These weren't for decoration. They were offerings, bread coins, a lock of hair, given to appease spirits or ancestors. Some believed that the dead passed over houses at night, peering through roofs. If they saw an offering, they blessed the home. If they didn't. The dreams that followed were rarely gentle. And what of the first sleep you remember it from earlier? that strange medieval pattern, two sleeps broken by a period of wakefulness. During that in-between hour, many performed small rites. Husbands whispered apologies. Wives stirred embers into symbols. Some rose to pray. Others listened. This was the time when whispers traveled. Thin-walled cottages meant every cough, every sigh, every turn in the sheets was heard. And so the in-between hour became the medieval world's most private and yet most exposed window. It was when secrets passed between lovers, when oaths were made in hushed voices, when deals were struck. One scribe wrote of his neighbor confessing a crime aloud in sleep, and he heard it all lying 3 beds away. The man was arrested 2 days later. Which brings us to the crime bed. If a murder was committed in bed, the bedding itself could be used as evidence, not just because of blood, but because it might hold the memory. In certain courts, the accused was forced to sleep one night in the same bed. If they had nightmares or screamed or spoke in their sleep, they were declared guilty. The belief that the soul knew the truth and under duress would reveal it. There are records of noblemen being forced into the beds of those they were accused of poisoning, sometimes alone, sometimes with a priest watching, sometimes with a candle burning beside them and a page recording every breath. Most didn't sleep at all. And if they did, what they said was rarely comforting. Now back in your own bed, you begin to wonder what yours might say, what dreams it's held, what sounds it's remembered. Because if the medieval world believed anything, it was that beds keep secrets. They were passed down not just as furniture, but as shrines. A grandfather's bed became the son's bed, then the grandson's. And with each new sleeper came new rituals. Some added herbs, others scratched initials into the frame. A few carved prayers into the slats beneath the mattress, out of sight, but never out of reach. One bed in Brittany was said to weep during storms, not with water, but with sound. A faint moan. It had belonged to a woman who died in childbirth during a thunderclap, and her daughters kept it for generations. No one dared sleep in it during bad weather, but they never burned it. To destroy it would be to lose the last of her. And so the bed endured, as beds always do. Even now yours waits. It holds your shape. It listens to your breath, and it remembers every night. You've lived every hour. You've feared every dream you've forgotten. It will remember tonight too. And there's still more to come. There's a chill now, not from the wind. The window is still sealed with wax and cloth. No breeze leaks in. But the air has changed. You feel it in your fingertips, first dry, brittle like frost without the sparkle. Then your chest tightens and you become acutely aware of your own breath. Shallow, careful, controlled. You've entered the hour that medieval people feared most. The death hour, between 3 and 4 in the morning. Not quite night, not quite dawn, just a gray space between days. This was the time many were believed to die, not because the body failed, but because the spirit chose to leave. Monks called it the dissolution hour. Midwives called it the thinning. And ordinary folk, they just called it that time when the house goes silent. It's also when the third knock might come. You remember the first one, long ago now, hollow, patient. But it's the third knock that matters. That's the one you never answer. Because if you do, the one knocking doesn't enter the room. You leave it. So people developed rules. Never speak aloud between 3 and 4. Never get out of bed unless absolutely necessary. And if you must rise, light a candle first. Say a prayer before your feet touch the floor. And never ever look into a mirror, because that's when you might see something else looking back. But of course, mirrors weren't common. Most medieval homes didn't have glass, certainly not in the bedroom. They used water, metal, polished obsidian. And what you saw in those surfaces at night was rarely comforting. Reflections at that hour were considered unstable, not fully yours. One superstition claimed your reflection might tell you something you didn't want to know. So most people covered mirrors after sundown, draped them in cloth, turned them toward the wall, or in some cases, buried them under the bed until morning. But if the death hour passed without a visit, you still weren't safe. Because now came the reawakening, the brief return to sleep before the sun. Second sleep's fragile cousin. Not quite restful, but often vivid. This was the time of dreams so real you might weep when waking. Many believed these final dreams to be prophetic. Whatever you saw just before waking would linger through the day and perhaps the year. So people tried to control them. How? By placing things under their pillow. We've talked about bones, herbs, bread. But this hour was more precise. You needed intention, a written note, a drawing, a scrap of someone's clothing, even a spoon, yes, a spoon used by the person you wished to dream of. One knight reportedly carried a handkerchief embroidered by his lover beneath his pillow for 30 years, hoping to dream of her face again. And when he did, he died the next morning, smiling. But others used this hour for darker purposes. In witch trials across Europe, people accused of sorcery were often said to have walked in dreams. That is, they didn't need broomsticks or spells. They simply fell asleep and traveled. Into locked rooms, into people's beds, into their mouths. Yes, into their mouths. It was believed that witches could possess people during their second sleep. Not by breaking doors or windows, but by entering through breath. The sleeper would twitch, mumble, gasp. And when they woke, they'd remember nothing. But their body would be changed. Their heart weaker, their soul dimmer. To protect against this, sleepers were told to place a nail wrapped in linen on the tongue before bed. They didn't swallow it. They just held it there, long enough to show they were aware of the risks. Children were exempt mostly, but even they weren't untouched. Some parents tied small bells around their children's ankles before bed, not to hear them run, but to hear them if they rose without waking. A bell at 3 a.m. meant the child was wandering, maybe in sleep, maybe not. And if the bell didn't ring, they checked the child's breath. Always. The fear wasn't just sudden death, it was replacement. A child too still might have been taken, replaced. We've spoken of changelings before, but now we're deeper. This is where mothers whispered promises to their babies as they slept. Not lullabies. Promises. I will not let them take you. I will wake if you go, I will know if you change. And still sometimes they were wrong. There are folk tales of children waking with eyes too old, speech too formal, laughter that never came from the belly. When that happened, families acted fast. A priest might be summoned, a charm tied to the child's wrist, or in the darkest cases, a test. a lie told to see how the child reacted, because the real child wouldn't know the lie, but the imposter might. Of course, none of this proved anything, but it didn't have to. Nighttime was not about proof, it was about survival. And there were other dangers too. The firebed, for instance. In winter, families often slept close to the hearth, not for comfort, but necessity. But with open flame came danger, sparks, smoke, suffocation. So people developed rituals to guard the fire. At bedtime, the coals were banked, covered with ash to smother flames but preserve heat. Then the hearth was spoken to, not joking. People whispered to it, asked it to sleep, thanked it for the day, warned it not to rise too high. Fire, after all, was alive. In some households, the ashes were sprinkled in a circle around the bedding, a literal line of safety. If come morning the ash had been disturbed by foot, by claw, by anything, it meant something had visited. The bed might be moved, or abandoned altogether. There's even record of one family that rotated beds weekly just to avoid buildup of spiritual residue, which brings us to a final ritual for this hour. The last word. Before falling back asleep, some people whispered a word into the darkness. Not a prayer, not a name, just a single word chosen instinctively. Warmth, forgive, return. No one knows why it worked. Only that people believed it gave shape to the last dream, and sometimes to the morning that followed. Now you feel the weight of that silence again. That moment before the second sleep creeps in. Your mouth is dry, your limbs are still, but your mind is full of images, rituals, dreams, names half-spoken. You think of your own bed, your own dreams, and the dark, waiting stillness between them. The dark is different now. It's not the thick, oppressive blackness of midnight, nor the thin, aching chill of the death hour. This is something liminal, a whisper of light just enough to make the shadows move. You can't see the sun, but you can feel the promise of it. And still, you don't move. Because in the medieval world, this was the most delicate time of all pre-dawn, a moment of transition. And like all transitions, it came with its own rules, its own threats, its own rituals. This was when the threshold spirits walked. They weren't demons, not exactly, nor were they ancestors. They were something else. Guardians, maybe. Watchers. Some called them shades. Others called them listeners. And the belief was this: just before dawn, your words could shape your fate. If you spoke a truth, it would become more true. If you spoke a lie, it might follow you all day. So people stayed silent. In noble households, servants moved barefoot through the halls, preparing fires and bread, but never speaking until the first bell. In peasant homes, the first to rise was often the mother, and her first task, stir the ashes, not just to wake the hearth, but to scatter any footprints left in the night, footprints that no one admitted to making. And yes, ashes were used for that. In fact, some families scattered a thin layer across the threshold of the bedchamber every night. Not to catch thieves, to catch spirits. If they passed through, they left marks, tiny ridges, patterns in dust. And if you knew how to read them, they told you where the spirit had stood, how long it had watched, and whether it had left or lingered. Sometimes the marks weren't human, clawed, hooved, or spiraled like something had spun in place. When that happened, you didn't sweep it up. You shoveled the ashes into a clay jar, buried it by the crossroads, and you didn't sleep in that room again until after the next full moon. But in more hopeful homes, the pre-dawn hour was sacred, a chance to start again. Some people rose early just to catch the silver breath, a poetic phrase for the air before sunrise. It was said that breathing it in purified the soul, especially if done in silence. Children were occasionally woken for this, taken outside in bare feet and told to inhale deeply while facing east. Then there was sunbedding. In parts of France and Italy, it was customary to take one's bedding outside at first light on certain feast days, to air it, cleanse it, not just of lice or dust, but of energy. Blankets were draped over fences, sheets hung from trees, mattresses beaten then left to lie beneath the rising sun. Some people even whispered their fears into the folds of the cloth before carrying them out, letting the sun burn away the heaviness of the night. And on these mornings, people examined their pillows. Yes, pillows were studied. Creases, stains, shapes left in the linen. Everything was read like tea leaves. A pillow indented on both sides meant company in your dreams. A dry pillow after tears meant healing. A stain in the shape of a circle meant protection. But a pillow too flat, untouched, that meant you had not truly slept, and something else had borrowed your rest. Which brings us to a particularly unsettling ritual, the sleep audit. In some monastic communities, each monk or nun was required to give a morning report, not just of what they dreamt, but how they slept. Did they wake? Did they sweat? Did they hear voices? If they slept too deeply, that was a warning. If they didn't sleep at all, another kind. Patterns were noted, especially during feast weeks or eclipses, and sometimes the data was shared with the bishop, because sleep wasn't private. Not really. It was part of the moral economy. A person who always slept soundly, either very holy or very suspicious. After all, what did they have to hide from? Meanwhile, outside the cloister, people were performing their own checks. Parents hovered over sleeping children, checking for night leavings. That was the term for what we'd now call sleep-talking, sleepwalking, or even nocturnal emissions. In the Middle Ages, these were clues, warnings, the soul leaking at the edges. Some children were forced to sleep with small leather straps on their wrists, bells attached. If they moved too much, everyone would know. Others were made to sleep facing a mirror, a terrifying thought, so that the parents could see the soul shift during the night. And if a child's face looked too old in sleep, that was a sign. Which brings us to the most unnerving ritual of the pre-dawn hour, the watching wake. This one's hard to talk about. In certain rural areas, if a loved one had been ill or cursed, or simply not right for too long, family members would watch them sleep. But not from across the room, from inches away. They'd sit beside the bed and stare at the sleeper's face candle flickering nearby until the first light touched the floor. They were looking for something specific change. The way the brow furrowed, the lips moved, the eyelids fluttered. And if the face changed too much, if it looked like someone else's or twisted in a strange direction, they'd wake the sleeper violently, douse them in water, force them to speak their name. Not out of cruelty, but to anchor them back into their body. And if they didn't wake, you didn't touch them. You tied a ribbon around their ankle, waited to see if they stirred by themselves. Some didn't. Some never woke. Their bodies lived, but their minds wandered. Such people were called the fated, not dead, not mad, just lost somewhere between the two sleeps. Most villages had one, a man or woman who never fully returned from dreaming. They lived quietly, spoke little, slept often, and people avoided eye contact. Because if they looked into the eyes of the fated, they might see what they had dreamed, or worse, what was coming for them. The pre-dawn hour is thinning now. You feel it, don't you? The world around you slowly returning. The walls feel real again. The blanket feels like cloth, not shadow, but the rituals cling to you like dust. Ancient, quiet, unshakable. Because the bed isn't just a place you go to, it's a place you pass through, and soon you'll reach the other side. You think the night is over, but the medieval world knew better. Because just before the sun rises, before the cock crows, before the bread is broken and the bells toll, there is a sliver of time that feels wrong. Too still, too expectant. It's not the safety of morning nor the terror of midnight. It's what they called the glimmering, or sometimes the returning. Not returning to life necessarily, or to warmth, but to body, to consequence. Because while you were sleeping fitfully, dreamily, sweat-soaked and salt-guarded things were happening. And now the world will show you what they've left behind. This is the hour when the bed must be read. In noble homes, servants entered silently. They stripped the sheets and looked, not just for stains or lice, but for signs. Blood was common, whether from a wound, a lover, a new wife, or something stranger. Sheets were inspected like scrolls. Was the mark in the center, near the edge, faint, dark, congealed? Each meant something different. In some courts, these inspections were ritualized. A senior lady-in-waiting might record her findings in a small book. That's right, a book of beds, especially after weddings, illnesses, or visits from important guests. Because a bed could testify. And in a world where written contracts were rare and words were slippery, a sheet could speak volumes. Even among commoners, linen lore mattered. A sheet that tore in the night was considered a bad omen, especially if the tear was along the edge, not the middle. A pillow that fell to the floor without being touched was seen as a warning someone close to the family might die. And if a mattress was found pushed out of place just slightly, it meant a restless spirit had sat beside the sleeper. So families developed rituals for bed resetting. It wasn't just making the bed, it was cleansing it. You didn't just fluff pillows, you thumped them 3 times to drive out residue. You didn't just shake sheets, you snapped them east to west. In some regions, they'd scatter ashes or flour across the sheet after sleep, checking for unusual shapes. A curl, a spiral, a footprint. One woman in Flanders claimed she found a full handprint pressed into her pillow, despite sleeping alone. She moved out the next day. But there were more personal rituals, too, like the first word. You've heard of the last word whispered before sleep to shape the night. But the first word that was to shape the day. Some families kept a designated phrase, a simple invocation. Grace, peace, safe. Spoken aloud before your feet touched the ground. It had to be intentional. Anything else, mumbling, cursing, sighing, invited bad luck. And yes, if you forgot, there were fixes. You could spin in a circle 3 times. You could knock 3 times on the bed frame. Or you could whisper your name backward into your pillow and pretend the day hadn't started yet. Superstition. Maybe, but this was survival. And speaking of survival, let's revisit the mourning beds. We've touched on death before, but we haven't talked about how the living slept in grief. A widower newly alone didn't just crawl back into a cold bed. He had rules, he had rituals. In many regions, he was forbidden to sleep in the same room for 9 nights. Some wore black ribbons tied around the wrist while sleeping to keep the dead from visiting in dreams. Others covered the mirror, darkened the window, and lay on the floor with a stone under their head. Grief was supposed to be heavy, felt. For women, morning sleep was stricter. A widow might not be allowed to rest on her marital bed at all. She'd be moved to a pallet, her hair unbraided, her shoes removed and buried in a clay pot until her period of mourning ended. Shoes symbolized movement. Until grief passed, she was not meant to go anywhere, not even in dreams. Children mourned differently. They were given a talisman, something to sleep with. A button from the deceased's clothing, a lock of hair, a coin kissed by the body before burial. They were told not to speak of their dreams aloud, not until the 13th day. If they dreamed of the lost, it meant peace. If they didn't, the soul might still be wandering. And yes, dreams of the dead were powerful. If someone you loved visited your dreams, it wasn't just memory, it was message. Most dream visitors came in silence. They pointed, they looked, they wept. Rarely did they speak. But when they did, you remembered every word. One man in Kent dreamed of his father standing at the foot of his bed whispering, "The key is not where you left it." The next day, the man found a buried lockbox beneath a tree. He never opened it. He simply burned it. Some messages are better left unanswered. And now, the light is closer. You feel it behind your eyelids. That pale pink glow, the kind that makes you squint even in sleep. But still, the medieval world doesn't let go of you. Not yet. Because the final ritual, it's not religious. It's not magical. It's remembering. You wake slowly. You don't move. You don't speak. You lie still and replay your dreams. It's not for curiosity. It's for safety. To remember is to anchor. To forget is to drift. Some people kept small dream books beside their beds. Scraps of parchment wax tablets, cloth journals. A few drew symbols, a face, a flame, a bird. Whatever came in the night, whatever visited was honored, even feared, even loved. Because the bed wasn't a place of escape. It was a place of witness. And yours. It has borne witness to 1,000 little deaths and resurrections. Every night, every breath, every whisper. It's almost morning now, almost. The birds begin. Not with song, just little clicks. Throat scratches, half notes. It's not light enough yet for a full chorus. But their awareness reaches you first, before your eyes open, before your muscles remember they're yours again. In the medieval world, this was the true marker of morning, the animal awakening. Chickens rustling in coops, goats shifting on straw, dogs shaking off the dark, and with them the house begins to breathe again. But you still lying here are caught in the final stage of the night's ritual, one that many never noticed, but all felt the forgetting. It starts subtly. The dream vivid just moments ago fades. The warmth, the terror, the symbols all sliding out of reach like mist retreating from a rising sun. You try to hold on to one detail, a voice, a gesture, a shape in the doorway. But it's gone. The medieval sleeper knew this sensation well. and they treated it with deep suspicion, because what you forgot might not be your own. Some believed that dream thieves walked among the living, people who could enter your sleep, extract your secrets, and leave you empty. If you woke with a blank mind and a pounding heart, you weren't just groggy. You'd been robbed. To prevent this, some slept with iron rings on their fingers or a silver needle under the tongue. A few, those most afraid, bit their own thumb upon waking, a small drop of blood to seal what remained. But more often, sleepers simply surrendered. The night had taken its toll. What it gave and what it stole was between them and the dark. Still, certain rituals persisted after waking. The bed wasn't left immediately. You sat. You thanked the mattress, the wood, the warmth, especially if you dreamed safely. Some whispered morning blessings not to God, but to the bed itself. A quiet reverence for surviving the hours when the world was most porous. Others spoke aloud their dream, even if no one listened. Not to share, but to fix it in place. A tether. A way of saying, this is mine. No one may take it. And there were those who never spoke their dreams at all, who believed silence gave the dream time to unfold in real life. That each word spoken aloud unwound the thread a little more. They carried their dreams in silence like talismans or warnings. Now the household begins to stir. In a village, the baker is stoking his oven. In the castle, servants are pulling drapes open. In the cloister, monks chant lauds. The rhythm of day begins again. But the night doesn't vanish. It never does. It just recedes. Like a tide, leaving behind its seaweed, its bones, its salt. And so the sleepers rise. They dust ashes from their feet, pull pins from their pillows, shake off dreams, check their linens, murmur the first word of the day, and step carefully onto the floor. Because everyone knows the night doesn't end. It just waits. Beneath the bed, behind the curtain, in the cool spot on the mattress that no one remembers lying on. It waits for dusk, for the candle, for the prayer, for the rituals to begin again. And you'll be ready. Because now you've heard the stories. You've walked through the chamber doors, pressed your fingers to the mattress, whispered into the stillness. You've survived the night. And now at last you may rest. You did it. You made it through the most unsettling, peculiar, and haunting bedroom rituals the medieval world had to offer. You traveled through monasteries and manors, cottages and cloisters. You shared your bed with strangers, saints, and spirits. You watched the candle flicker. You heard the knocks. You counted the rituals not for curiosity, but for survival. Maybe you didn't realize it, but every part of the night had a purpose, a system, a story. Nothing was random. Every herb under the pillow, every prayer at the threshold, every whispered name, it all belonged to a larger tapestry woven from fear, faith, and folklore. Because in a world of plagues and poverty, firelight and famine, sleep wasn't just a necessity. It was a gamble. And the bed, it wasn't safe. It was a place of power, of punishment, of revelation. You don't need to remember every detail. Not the bones beneath the mattress. Not the bells on children's ankles. Not the stories of dream thieves or ash circles or iron under the tongue. You can let all that go now. Because your body is soft again. Your breath is slow. Your room is quiet. Whatever shadows you carried in with you are softer now, blurred at the edges, fading with each blink. Let them fade. Let the stories settle. Let the rituals pass you by like a distant chant at the edge of sleep. You're warm. You're still. You're safe.